All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We're going to talk about one of the key foundations of effective executive coaching, and that's the crucial coaching conversation that we call active inquiry. It embodies most of really all of the core competencies that the International Coaching Federation, or ICF, promotes. But we do it in a way, we hope, that's very practical, very much focused on providing value for the client and results for the client. So let's jump in. We're going to start with defining this foundational coaching conversation, look at how a typical executive coaching session flows. Before we do that, I want to give you an overview of the executive coaching marketplace, how I got into coaching. Then we'll get into, I just want to give you some generic examples of coaching questions, things a coach shouldn't do. There's a lot of questions about, can a coach give advice or not? We'll talk about that. I'll show you a framework that I really like that shows 3 tensions for executive coaches. If it seems right, we'll get into some more specific coaching behaviors. Then we'll do a practice exercise. Okay. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the Center for Executive Coaching for those who want to stick around and see that. Okay, so much of this, most of this should be educational. Pop your questions into the chat anytime. I'll stop from time to time to take questions. Okay, so first of all, my name's Andrew Nightlick. You can see my name spelled up there on the screen. I was a management consultant after graduating from Harvard Business School, this was in the 90s. And it didn't take long. I mean, I was there at a management consulting firm for a good 6 years. But I wasn't particularly happy. There was just too much flying around. And at a certain point, what I noticed was a pattern with my clients. And the pattern was that, we work our butts off, weekends, long nights, creating beautiful PowerPoint documents, benchmarking studies, and so on. And, eventually clients would say, yep, that's what I thought. And so after a while, I said, so why am I doing this? And I'd ask clients, I'd say, you just spent $250,000 on a benchmarking study, and you said you already knew the answer. Why did you hire us? And it was the answers of these clients that got me into coaching. Clients would say things like, listen, I know the answer there. I'm not really hiring you for this team of analysts that you bring or for these PowerPoints. It's just, I really value our conversations. I don't have too many people I can turn to. I certainly don't feel comfortable being vulnerable with my executive team. There are people gunning for my job or who weren't happy I was promoted or hired in the first place. And so what I didn't even know that there was a coaching market at the time, but what they were asking for essentially was coaching. They wanted a sounding board. They wanted someone they could talk to. And so that I just became a coach, an executive coach. And as a result of that, I really have the life of my dreams. You see me, I'm speaking here from my home office. I have a 7-figure practice, and I work with amazing leaders on critical issues. I don't have to manage a team of analysts and put together PowerPoints. I mean, we get right to the heart of what's the biggest issue you have going on as a leader. How can we help you be a better leader? I choose how I use my time. I've been able to write books. I get invited to speak around the world, make a great income. I don't have to retire. I just love what I'm doing. And so many other people who get into coaching have found the same thing. There's a photo of a car ferry on the left of this page. Part of the time I live on an island on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It's called Palm Island, if you know it. And I have clients all over the world. And that seems to be the trend. I mean, since COVID, since the pandemic, more and more people are finding that you don't have to drive to the client and be in person. And so you really have a new opportunity to set yourself up as a national or international expert. So it's just really a very exciting time and a wonderful time to be in business. The Center for Executive Coaching is an ICF accredited ACTP. Now that word, if you know the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, ACTP is going away this year, and we will be what's called a level 2 organization. This is going to have very little impact on any of you, but you'll hear those terms being thrown about. So you should just know that. We have a specialty. Okay, the people who come to us are dynamic, already successful professionals. right? So we get leaders in all sorts of organizations, everything from the National Basketball Association. We've trained at least one assistant coach, one of whom has won a championship with his team, to return military leaders, people in Fortune 500s, people in entrepreneurial companies, people in nonprofits, universities, K through 12 education, government, large and small. But what they all have in common is they're successful. And they have a passion for mentoring, coaching, and developing people to be better. Okay, so if that describes you, you don't have to be a CEO of a billion-dollar company, but you should have a track record of success. We also attract a lot of people in healthcare, clinicians, MDs, lawyers, psychologists, and so on. Okay, so we're very different than the types of people who go to other programs that are much larger. Our share of the market is less than 1% in terms of helping people get ICF designations. We just want the high-end, already successful professionals, okay? And what we're known for is being a boutique organization, okay? Again, there's one coaching company out there that claims to have trained half the coaches out there. We never want to be that. We just want the good ones. And what we're known for is personalized support that never ends. It's ongoing. Everything we do is practical. It's focused on results. It's focused on delighting your clients, whether you're an internal coach, which we train a lot of, or an external coach setting up your own practice. You don't hear a lot of coach training programs talk about the client, about value, about results, and that's shocking to me. We're also known for our unmatched suite of coaching solutions and toolkits that you can't get anywhere else. Okay, so we're going to equip you to be ready for any situation, any leadership situation or challenge that your clients have. All right, you know, you can go to our website and see our testimonials. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and see over 240 recommendations. But how we really measure ourselves is with the success of our members. And so you can see a couple of testimonials here from some veterans as well as some recent graduates. Okay. All right, let's get into some content here. And again, ask questions anytime in the chat. If you're listening to the recording, welcome and thank you for listening. Reach out anytime. Okay. So the ICF and I think others try to distinguish between or among coaching, therapy, and consulting. And so I just want to make sure everybody's clear what we're talking about here. We get a lot of consultants, by the way, and a lot of therapists. And I have no problem with a hybrid practice. I do that myself. I do some facilitation, some training, some assessing, some consulting, and lots of coaching. There's a Venn diagram, and there's a lot of overlap. Good consultants use coaching. Good therapists often ask questions that sound a lot like coaching. Okay. In sort of bumper sticker language, though, therapists tend to focus on the emotional past, right? They'll go deep into the past, into emotions. As coaches, we tend more to move into the unknown, into the future. Perhaps the closest thing to psychology and therapeutic interventions that resonates with coaching is positive psychology, if you're familiar with that. Consultants tend to be much more directive. They give advice. They're paid to be experts who give advice. Whereas coaches are much more about having the client figure things out. Having said that, if you're an expert, if you're a consultant, we're going to show you how to toggle between giving advice and coaching. I found that the best consultants are excellent coaches. Otherwise, the client isn't going to accept your ideas and they're never going to implement based on where they are. You see some definitions of coaching on the left. The ICF defines coaching as partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process to inspire them to maximize their personal and professional potential. For us, executive coaching is a series of high-impact conversations that enables already successful professionals to generate sustained improvement in performance. So we take a more practical, results-driven, market-focused approach because that's what your clients, all coaching clients, are going to demand. Okay. The coaching market, I think it's a great time to get in. Coaching continues to be accepted more and more for professional development. Certainly with the pandemic and all that's going in the world today, there's so many leaders who I just need someone to talk to. I just need to vent. I need a sounding board. but also I need to be a better leader. So coaching continues to grow. There's return on investment studies. You can get those from the ICF website or Google them that show proven returns from coaching. And that's just coaching on its own, but also training plus coaching can generate 4 times the results of training alone, which I think would make intuitive sense, right? If we follow up with people weekly or monthly after a training, they're more likely to keep that, what they learned in the training, alive and implement it. And well over half of Fortune 500 companies rely on coaching as a standard professional development tool. We get a lot of people from Fortune 500s, both internal coaches that we train, as well as leaders and managers that want to use coaching in what they do or become coaches in their next iteration of their career. When we talk about executive coaching, we're talking about all levels, okay? We're very broad. It doesn't just mean C-suite executives, although of course it includes C-suite executives, right? C-suite, CEO, COO, anybody with the word chief before their title. Senior leaders, middle managers, up and coming talent is a great area for coaching, and we'll teach you some group coaching models so that you can coach them at a budget that works for their organizations. First-time managers, career transitions, solopreneurs, business owners, entrepreneurs, family business owners, okay? So executive coaching, really broad. And the types of organizations are broad as well, right? It could be for-profits of all sizes, nonprofits of all sizes, federal, state, local government, educational institutions, and again, solo professionals. The situations you can coach people in are all over the map. It's everything from I want to be a better leader to I want to communicate with more impact. We get a lot of people who are what you call brilliant jerks. They have a behavioral blind spot or blind spots, and they need to correct that if the organization is going to continue to employ them, even though they might be brilliant. There's perceptual coaching where we help people shift limiting beliefs, things like I can't trust other people, everything needs to be perfect. Resolving conflict, engaging and motivating their team, that's huge these days. Leading teams, navigating change, planning and executing strategy, succeeding in a new role. Most of my coaching clients from the last year are in that area. They're calling me and saying, Andrew, I just got promoted to CEO, or I've been designated interim president. I want to have the interim removed. Creating a high-performing culture, developing a pipeline of leaders, overcoming overwhelm is also huge right now. So is growth. You know, a lot of companies have been really successful during COVID, technology especially. And so there's a lot of coaching just about how do we grow? How do we develop more leaders? How do we handle the choke points, if you will, that our organization has now that we're growing? You know, things like overlapping roles, lack of systems and processes. So if you want to become a coach, you can pick an issue and you can really become the go-to professional for that issue. And there's tons of niches, right? Should you join us, we're going to work with you to figure out what is your superpower as a coach. We talked about, you know, almost anything, technology, science, clinical, for different reasons, right? In healthcare delivery systems, I mean, we get a ton of physicians, leaders in healthcare. Why? Because healthcare is overwhelmed and has been since the pandemic. There's a lot of burnout or potential burnout. I've been working with healthcare for almost 30 years now, and things never get better. They just get harder and harder. The language changes, the words used to describe the change changes, but the issues are almost always the same, people issues. Professional service firms like consulting firms always need help, knowledge workers, success in a new role, growing businesses. I see a lot with family businesses. It's really hard to run a family business. And now you see a lot of, we want to hand the business off to the next generation. How do we do that? How do we prepare that next generation? Not to mention a lot of conflicts in family businesses. Financial services right now, banks and fintech, nonprofits. That's where I started as an executive coach, working with boards and executive directors of nonprofits. Military leaders is a huge opportunity. Anything teams, anything with high potentials, and change. I get a lot of calls from executive teams saying, we have a change initiative and it's stuck. Can you work with us? So there's a ton of potential. Okay, should you join us? And then let's get into the foundational coaching conversation. we have a pledge, right? We want to be the best. We are the best, in my opinion. We're going to have the best content, the best support, the best members. We're a boutique coaching, certification, and training organization, okay? Everything is about your success. We don't cut you loose. You are a member ongoing. And so we support your success long after you join. It's not uncommon for us to train internal coaches and then have them leave the organization and become an external coach maybe a decade later, and we're still in touch. We're helping them build their practice. And I'm always here, okay? So it's not like I'm the founder of this program. I wrote all the content. I constantly update it. I personally will work with you. So it's not like some of these other programs where you get a carbon copy of a carbon copy of a carbon copy, often someone who has no coaching practice, but is making their income teaching coaching. That's ridiculous, but it's common. So you get basically an ongoing help desk. I actually block out hours for office hours every day. And that's my favorite part of the program. The other thing about us is we go way beyond the ICF Core Coaching Competencies. The ICF calls itself the gold standard in coaching. My opinion of the ICF is they're great. I'm glad they exist. They teach what's necessary, but not what's sufficient. You need more if you want to succeed in the executive coaching, as opposed to, say, life coaching space. Okay, and our tools and solutions are going to be unmatched in their scope, breadth, and depth. Okay, that's our pledge. That includes marketing and business development content. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's talk about the foundation, the foundational executive coaching conversation. Now, what you're going to learn today is like barely an hour of over 390 hours that we've been approved with the ICF, and our live curriculum runs 90 live hours. Okay, so I really need to manage your expectations here. This is the beginning. That's all this is. And so we have to make some assumptions, and I need you to go with me on these, or you're going to be frustrated, and I'm going to get a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm going to be frustrated too. So number one, you're already hired, and the client is excited and coachable. Okay, there's a lot of work to be done before you start coaching a client, and of course we cover that. It's called contracting. We got to make sure the client's coachable. If you're being paid by an organization, we have to make sure there's support from the organization so that you're not the lightning rod when things go wrong. So there's a lot to do just there. We need to be clear on the goals and scope of the coaching. Let's assume that's already in place. We're going to isolate just one coaching session here. And so we're focused on that single coaching conversation. Just please understand, in our program, there's a ton more to learn, right? We get into the process of coaching. How do you set up an engagement? What's an engagement look like? What's the coaching plan look like? How do you choose the right assessment tools and assess the client and the situation? You know, when do you do a verbal assessment and some verbal interviews? When do you do an online 360-degree assessment? When do you do an assessment that the client fills out to understand their thinking styles, behavioral traits, and really get to know them? How do you choose the right assessment? We look at all of that. How do you make sure you're tracking and measuring results? Everything we do has an element, regardless of the engagement, of making sure you're tracking results. In fact, I won't take an engagement with a client unless we confirm up front that we know what success looks like, we know what the return expected is, and we know how to measure it. Sometimes that measurement is just intangible stuff. Client feels more confident. Client has less stress. Client gets their life back, right? Isn't working as many hours because they're more productive. We have a ton of content about different situations that leaders face, right? We have over 30 coaching solutions or toolkits for the most pressing challenges that leaders at all levels face. So you'll be prepared for those, but we can't discuss that today. And ultimately, we want you to be a trusted advisor, whether you're an internal coach or an external coach. And so what we're about is that, not just having a couple of sessions with a client, being a one and done coach. We want you to have long-term relationships with your client so that as they grow, as their organization grows, they see you as somebody they can turn to when they have new situations that come up. So please bear with me as we go through this session, because these are key assumptions, okay? So now let's get into it. We call this active inquiry. You won't see active inquiry named with the International Coaching Federation core competencies, but it embodies a lot of the core competencies that are out there. So for us, it's a foundational conversation that every coach should know. When we talk about it in the context of executive coaching, it's about helping the leader perform better in their role. Although often that work bleeds to the rest of their life too, which is really cool. So active inquiry is a dialogue consisting of powerful questions, active listening, and reflecting. That's going to include all of the following, right? There's going to be a good goal set up for the session, a clear goal. We're going to understand the client's goal for whatever situation they're facing as well, right? So a goal for the session, what we're going to achieve together, and what the client wants to achieve with whatever challenge or opportunity they face. From there, we're going to explore, right? Coaching is about exploring and helping the client get where they want to go. It's not about pushing our agenda onto a client. It's not about diagnosing and saying, here's what you should do. You'll see in a moment when we can give advice. I have a point of view about that. And then we're going to conclude every session with learnings, next steps, and accountability to move forward, right? Coaching is not, sometimes in therapy, clients have an understanding of their situation and things tend to clear up once they do. But here we're very much focused on, so what are you going to do about it? What happens next? How are you going to demonstrate what you've learned here and improve results? Coaching is not just about the what, right? So myself, I'm pretty analytical. I'm left brain, come from a top business school. It's my natural inclination to talk about the what. I love doing it. I want to talk about the problem, but coaches also look at the who, right? We have to understand the client's culture, their beliefs, their values, their strengths, their talents, who they are, and use that so that they come up with the solution that's best for them and learn a little bit about who they are as well. So that's where coaching is really fun. It's about the who and the what. With active inquiry, we're letting the client guide the process, right? So you're welcome to make observations. You're welcome to give advice, although I encourage you to do that sparingly. But the client guides the process. If you're going to do those things, the idea in coaching is that you're detached. You can put things out there, but let the client tell you where they want to go, right? My typical client relationship is about 6 months, and then 80% of the time clients renew for another 6 months. So that means we have a lot of time to explore and for the client to have insights and get better. I'm not going to enter into a fight or a debate with them saying, no, you should really do this because that's what I would do in your shoes. That's not coaching. And really the key that I've learned over 20 years of doing this is it's about listening. If you listen well and also keep the goal for the session and the engagement in mind, essentially coaching becomes pretty simple. The client tells you what to ask next. The problem is this is a deceptively simple observation. That is, a lot of people who become coaches are used to giving advice, being the smartest person in the room, directing. And so there's a transition I've had to make. I had to go from being sort of the smart consultant to a coach that could let the client be the smartest person in the room and figure things out. And my coaching practice has grown tremendously once I figured out how to do that. Okay. Any questions so far? If so, please put them in the chat. I'm going to keep going though. So what does this mean for how a typical coaching session flows? There's really 3 steps, but sometimes we add a step 2 in here, especially when the client's new. Step 1, we're going to spend some time, right? So if I have a 1-hour session with a client, I'm going to spend some time asking some key questions to make sure we have a clear intent for the session, right? So I'm never going to start a session saying, what's on your mind? In fact, my clients have already emailed me the morning of or the day before to tell me what outcome they want. I train my clients so they do that. Okay, so I want to waste no time in a coaching session. So we can just review what they sent me. And I say, what would be a great session? I'm going to ask that. I'm going to say, if they present a challenge, I'm going to say, so what would be a great outcome? If you were successful in this challenge that you're facing, I'm going to ask them why it's important to them, right? Usually I already know that coming into the engagement, but if I don't, and I'm going to ask them how they want to start moving forward. What are your ideas? What would be useful to you so that we could start addressing those issues? If you could start a session properly, constructively, positively, with a clear intent in mind, odds are good you're going to be successful. That really sets things up right. Okay, 2, for a new client, I want to explain what active inquiry is. We teach you like 2 sentences. I'll say, listen, what I'm going to do is ask you a series of what I hope are helpful questions so that you have insights and address your challenge. We call this active inquiry. Is that okay with you? I only have to do this once or twice. 3, we're going to conduct active inquiry. That's really what we're going to get into here in depth. But essentially, I want to know how the client wants to move forward. I want the client to resolve their issue. From time to time, I'll make observations. Sure, I can give advice. You'll see that in a moment. And what's more important is you want to think of yourself as a telescope, if you will. From time to time, it's really important to zoom out and say, let's take a moment and check in on how you're doing. Right? Scale of 1 to 10. How are you doing with the goal you set for this session? How do we get you to a 10? What do you want to talk about now? You want a big part of coaching. The ICF uses this word partner a lot. You want to partner with the client to design the session and where it goes. Does that make sense? It's really important. So if I'm in a 1-hour session, like every 15 to 20 minutes, I want to check in. And the reason I want to do this is to make sure I'm not driving the conversation or frustrating the client or going somewhere they don't want to go. Finally, a good coaching session ends strong, right? So if it's a 1-hour session, I don't wait till 1 minute to say, all right, great session, here's your homework. That's bad coaching. About 12 minutes before the end of the hour, I'm going to tell the client, we're coming to the end of our time. What would be most useful to you to wrap up this session? Again, that's partnering with the client to design the session. And among the things we might get into is, what insights have you had? What have you learned? What are you going to do? How can you hold yourself accountable? I like to ask what was most valuable for you. And I always want to ask, where should we start next time? And that's what I'm going to write down in my old-fashioned day planner. I still use that. And I write down, this is what they said they wanted to start on this time. It doesn't mean that's where they're going to start, but at least I have some context. So that's the coaching session flow. Any questions? So far, it seems like this group doesn't have a lot of questions, which is perfectly fine. I hope I'm being clear and that this is helpful. So let me give you some generic examples of coaching questions. Listen, you don't want to do checklist coaching, right? If you join our program, what we're going to work with you on is how to listen to the client and find the right thing to say or ask, okay? But these are some generic examples of coaching questions. And to be perfectly clear, blunt, this was one of the biggest shocks for me, or surprises as a coach. Again, I was trained in the McKinsey model of management consulting long ago. I don't know if McKinsey still trains coaches, consultants the way they do. When I was at the firm, I was not at McKinsey. I was at a firm started by McKinsey Partners, a boutique firm. But, I don't know how they would react to this, because a lot of what I found is that the best results I get with clients are with really simple, high-level general questions. It's fascinating, but it makes sense. It goes right back to why I became a coach, right? Remember, the clients used to say, I already know the answer. I knew this, right? We're coaching super smart people. We're not coaching diseased people who need therapy. And so I could say things like, what would be a great outcome here? What are your ideas to get there? Where would you like to go from here? What's a small step you can take to get momentum? What can you build on that might be working now? Who does this well that you can model? What advice would you give to a colleague in the same situation? What's in your control? That's a massive question these days, right? So much is out of our control. So what's in your control? What can we talk about that's actually actionable versus what's a constraint? Sometimes clients make assumptions. Once we identify that assumption, we can say, what becomes possible? What becomes possible if you didn't make the assumption that the chairman of the board doesn't like you? What do you want coaching on now? And the 2 best coaching questions are, what else? And just keeping quiet. Just keep quiet, see what the client says. Often that's where the most powerful stuff comes. Again, these are generic, right? I would hate it if you printed out a sheet like this and just checked off each of these questions. That's not coaching. But again, some of the other coach training programs have to focus on that. We don't get clients who need to know that. Okay. So here's some things we suggest a coach should not do. One, don't interrupt unless there's a clear reason to do so. Right. So like if I get a client that just tells lengthy stories and we only have a half hour, I might interrupt and say, just so you know, I don't need all this background unless it's helpful to you. Right. Stacking questions means asking 2 or 3 questions at a time. I do that. It's a rookie mistake. I still do it. I have to check myself on that because clients can only answer 1 question at a time. I listen to tons of coaches on recordings, and help them. It's a great teaching tool and it's part of our program. But I'll hear coaches sometimes like they're really trying to show that they're in tune with the client, but what they're doing ends up being really distracting instead of supportive. A good coach talks much less than the client. I like the benchmark of 20 to 25%, although the ICF doesn't have an actual number right now. If you push the client in a particular direction, that's not great coaching. You want to get the client's input about where they want to go or respond to their cues. Judging the client. This includes often, sometimes a coach will step into what we might call an American guru kind of mode, where they'll say something like, I really like that. That could be dangerous, right? Better to just say, how can you validate the idea? How can you find out if it's good or not? Too many coaches use jargon to obfuscate, which is a jargony word right there. Use simple language. Use the client's language. We're going to teach you the client's language, right? So a lot of coaches are out there using, watch out for coaching programs that are pitching ontology, things, big language words, neuro this, neuro that. Be careful. You don't want your clients confused or rolling their eyes at you. And there's a lot of jargon in the coaching world. All right. And then Anne asked a question that you can see in the chat that really steps into this last bullet. If there's something deeper going on, anything from an addiction to a trauma, as coaches, unless you're a licensed therapist, you can't really go into that area. So you have to be ready to refer a client, right? If a client talks about hurting themselves or others, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've only once had a client where we talked about them having some therapy when they revealed something. And only on one recording did I hear a clear case of like, you got to stop the coaching. This client is potentially suicidal and needs immediate intervention. 20 years. So it doesn't happen a lot. Don't worry so much about that, because if you contract right up front, the client knows what coaching is and understands that we're focusing on something different than therapy. But, this is key. Coaches have to know the boundaries. We teach you that in our program. Doris asked a great question, which again, a little bit out of scope today, right? Because we're assuming we've already found the issue the client wants to work on. But often that's right. The clients will present one issue and it turns out to be something else. We just have to recontract as long as the client agrees, right? So for instance, as a consultant, all the time I'd work with healthcare delivery systems. Always the problem was we don't have enough revenue. When we went in there, the real problem was we're unproductive, right? We're wasting a lot of money. Our processes are bad. And so even if they made more revenue, it wouldn't matter, right? So consultants find that, coaches often find that too. So these are just some of the things I suggest a coach shouldn't do. I also don't care too much for why questions, asking why a lot. That's interrogative. And I tend not to ask the client about the past. I don't need to know stuff, right? I don't need to say, what have you tried, right? If what they tried worked, they wouldn't need coaching. Now, this is a key question. So when should you give advice? Should you give advice at all? There's a lot of really senior coaches that I work with, and they hate coaching in public, right? In fact, Brian Underhill is a very senior coach who wrote an article, Why I Will Never Demonstrate Coaching Again in Public. And the reason was he did it in front of a bunch of like ICF designated coaches. And he sometimes jumps into advice mode with a client and the audience starts yelling, that's not coaching, that's not coaching. Listen, our clients are paying us a ton of money. And if you're an expert in something and have a best practice, by all means, share it, right? If the client says, where's the bathroom? You're not going to say, I don't know, if you were the architect, where would you put it? You're going to tell the client where the bathroom is, right? So if you know a best practice, and in fact, the client hired you because part of what you know are best practices, you're going to find yourself weaving in coaching and advice. However, I think that too many people give advice when they don't need to. A great book that I highly recommend is The Advice Trap. And it will be shocking for those of you who come from a consulting background. But The Advice Trap says when we give advice, we really run into a lot of problems potentially, right? We're giving advice based on who we are, not based on who the client is, right? So that could get us into trouble right there. Number two, you can be liable, right? So if I have a client going into a high stakes influence conversation and I tell the client how I would do it, that's really risky because the client doesn't have our style. In fact, I had a coach who tried to get me to imitate her, and it was disastrous. She had skills that I didn't have, and how she inflects her voice, how she manipulates her facial muscles. It was a very frustrating experience. So the idea here is try to ask one more question, try to deflect, try to be even more curious. So if a client says, I had a client, he said, am I a good leader? That's what he said to me. I said, look, I meet with you 1 hour a week, and generally in a very unique type of setting, right? Coaching. So what do you think? And of course, we had some assessments, some 360, we knew some feedback, but it's not for me to say, yeah, you're a great leader. I don't know. If the client says, what would you do in my shoes? I'm going to try to deflect. I'm going to say something, look, I have some ideas, but as you know, they're more about what I would do given my own style and background, which is very different than yours. So how about we hear your ideas first? And usually that gets them to a point where they never even need to hear my ideas. And by the way, I'll say, I give ideas. What I found is that when I give ideas, my success rate is pretty much, if you know Shaquille O'Neal and his free throw shooting, what was his free throw shooting percentage in basketball? I think he made like 1 in 5 shots. It was something like 20%, when most players have something like a 90% free, right? That's about my giving advice and having advice accepted by clients percentage as a coach. And so I love that, right? If I'm forced to give an idea, the client almost always says, no, that's great. Now I can say, I told you, you weren't going to like it. You haven't liked any of my ideas, but now at least we know what you don't like. So you tell me, given that we know the boundaries of what you won't do, what do you see yourself doing? But that doesn't mean we can't make observations. Like I'll say things like, look, I hear you talking about X, but not Y. Where would you like to go here? Okay. The key is, however much advice you think you want to give, that you stay detached. Respect the client's decision. Give the client a choice about where they want to go after you've provided your advice. Right? I've seen coaches at the end of a session, they start going into lecture mode, and they'll give, I hear this all the time. They'll give like 7-minute lecture on, here's how influence works, or here's a framework. Okay, nice talking to you. See you next week. As if the client's just a sponge waiting to hear the coach's advice. It doesn't work. That did nothing. It wasted the client's time. It would have been so much better just to say, what are you taking away? Often, by the way, a client has their own resource, right? If you mention teams, you tell me there's a leader who hasn't heard of Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. We can just say, so what do you learn? What are you taking away from that book and that framework? All right. Last, like what I find is that clients are full. Their minds are full. They're like those high pressure steam boilers full of steam. What coaching allows them to do is drain the steam, and then they have space. And I love it when they use that space to come up with new creative ideas, new ways of seeing their problem or their opportunity. But it also means that at some point they trust us and they have room to hear us if we have something that we really feel like we need to share. That's a clear best practice or a clear trap that the client's falling into. Okay, so that's my take. Really what I'd say is give as little advice as you can. You're going to find you don't have to. And again, it's very surprising. I work with clients, their net worths are 10 to 100 times mine, and I have a pretty good net worth, and they are brilliant. And I wonder why they've hired me at all. And it turns out what they need is someone who can listen to them in a safe, objective environment Ask great questions, sometimes be a devil's advocate if they want that, sometimes be a sounding board, sometimes just try to help them process stuff. And they find it extremely valuable. Okay, so let me show you 3 tensions for the executive coach, and then let's do an exercise, all right, so that we can actually practice this together. Now, just know that if you join our program, which I hope you will, it's very different than what I'm doing here, right? This is lecture. In our program, we don't use Zoom webinar. We use Zoom meeting. We break you out into groups to practice, right? We do lots of demonstrations. We just don't do that as well here because I don't know who's on these webinars. It just takes one strange person to kill a webinar. So I hope you understand that and realize that should you join our program, we are going to practice this until you get it. It took me 6 hours when I first started coaching. I hung out in an organizational development group. We just practice and mess around with coaching. And my first 6 hours, the observer kept calling time out and telling me that I was being a consultant, too directive. It took me 6 hours. And so we baked that into the program, at least 6 initial hours to make sure you really see what coaching is, what it isn't, and you feel comfortable doing it. So one of the frameworks that we'll introduce to you is this triangle of ego, results, and relationships. With any client, you need to figure out the right balance among these 3, right? So ego, we all have ego. I'm not telling you to go to some monastery and extinguish your ego, right? There's no way. So ego means enough ego you want to have to be on equal footing with the client, right? You have to say some things that need to be said. You have to, have credibility with the client. But if you make it about you and not the client, that's where ego takes over, right? And there's plenty, there used to be, there aren't as many anymore. There's plenty of retired CEOs who hang out a shingle that says coach. And if you hire them, all you're going to get is their war stories. And they're just going to blabber on and give you advice. And it's really not very effective. That's too much ego. Too little ego. And, you're going to feel like you don't have anything to add to the client. You're going to have trouble saying what needs to be said. Results, right? You can't be a coach and get paid what coaches get paid if you don't get results. You have to be able to move the conversation forward when appropriate, ask tough questions, make tough observations if necessary. You have to do it though in a way that balances ego and relationships. If you push so hard that the client is offended or frustrated, you're not going to last long. And you have to have the emotional intelligence to see and be aware of where your client's at, because it's different for every client. Coaching is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? Anyone can get results by yelling loud enough, pushing hard enough, threatening. You don't want to do that. You don't want to get frustrated with your client. Okay, so you have to have that ability to say what needs to be said, but not push so hard that the client feels like you're being too aggressive. And again, different clients have different tolerances, different cultures, different organizations. The third one is relationships. You have to be good at relationships. By the way, of the 3, I tend to push towards results. And so, I know if I can be a good coach and balance these 3, including relationships, I know anybody who joins our program can as well, right? So think about the one, which of these 3 is going to be your toughest one? For me, I have to be very careful about that results, relationships, balance. Because again, I'm a former consultant, a former manager before that. And many of you are too. So the trick with relationships though, is coaching is about getting results. You can't forget that balance. You still have to have the types of conversations that move things forward. Sometimes I listen to coaching conversations from people who struggle with this leg of the triangle. And it sounds more like a conversation at Starbucks. There's no juice, there's no voltage in the conversation. Coaching is about moving things forward, and that's the results side. So you have to be able to do that. So I really like this framework. Each of you will have to figure out your own style. When you join our program, it's not about creating a clone of me or any of the other faculty members. We're very eclectic. We want you to figure out your style, what works best for you and your clients. Okay. Any questions about that? So, like Wanda says, how do you get results when the client is just in a conversation? Well, if the client's just in a conversation, that's your fault. That's your responsibility as a coach, right? So we're going to teach you the types of questions that move things forward. But if I find that the client's not moving forward, I'll just call it out. I'll say, I feel like we're going in circles here. What would be something I can ask you right now that will help you move forward and achieve the goal you wanted to in this session or in our engagement, right? That's an example of a coaching question that you wouldn't have with someone at a Starbucks, a friend at Starbucks. Okay. So I'm not going to cover this here, but what we've done is take the ICF Core Competencies and we get behavioral. We're going to show you exactly, especially if you're going for an ICF designation, how do you do things like create trust and safety? That's a pretty general aspirational kind of competency. I don't even know if it counts as a competency. So we're going to make things behavioral. What about being present? What does that really mean? Right? So we're going to help you see what that means right up front in our program. Listening actively, you hear that a lot, but how do you actually demonstrate that as a coach, but without doing it in such a way that you're distracting, saying that, that's really distracting, especially on Zoom or a cell phone, where a lot of coaching happens now. How do you evoke awareness? How do you close out a session? How do you facilitate client growth? This is all ICF language. Again, when you join our program, we're going to show you how to do this without fluff in a way that clients respect and appreciate, and that moves them forward towards results. Okay. So I want to do a quick practice exercise that I think works well in this webinar focus. I'm going to give you some actual things that coaches said in a situation. And I'd like you to come up with something better that you type in the chat. Okay. And again, why am I doing this? It's just worth reminding you that my goal here is that at some point you reach out to me for a strategy session, right? My hope is that most of you listening to this recording or here live with us today, you want to become a coach. You want to get certified as a coach. So please do reach out if you like this content, you think there's a potential fit, if you like my style, even though I'm only one of about, gosh, we have 5 or 6 faculty members now in the USA, plus faculty members around the world. So here we go. This is a client that's having a conflict with their business partner. And so let's just say the session starts and the client starts with what's on your mind, or where do you want to start, or tell me what's happened in the last week or so, or how do you feel about the recent election, right? What would be a better alternative to start this session off strong? You can type it into the chat. Good, Sherry gets it, right? What are your goals for this session? What would you like to get out of this session? Those are great, right? We want to get right to intent and results. Now, that doesn't mean you wouldn't take time to build rapport. And each of you has to figure out how you frame it in a way that's comfortable for you, right? I like Linda says, what would you like to accomplish in this session? Perfect, right? And then again, we can explore a little bit, right? We can say, what would be a good outcome in this situation? Why is this important to you? And especially we want to ask, how will you know that the session was successful? That's an important question to ask. Not just what do you want to achieve, but how will you know, right? So we cover all of that up front. Let's say the client says, I have a conflict with my business partner and I want to resolve it, right? That's not an uncommon coaching situation. We have a whole toolkit in our program about resolving conflict, whether with an individual or on teams. So here, this coach says, have you read the book, Crucial Conversations? It's a great book for this. Or the coach says, I hate conflict. I empathize with you on this one. Or tell me all about the conflict, right? These are mediocre responses. Okay, everyone see why? Like each of these is mediocre for a different reason. The first one, the coach is jumping right in with a suggestion, hasn't even listened. The second one, the coach is talking about the coach. It's all about the coach. And the third one, the coach is asking stuff the client already knows, right? What would be a better question here? How can we jump right into some results? Yeah, Pam has a good question, right? What value would you get out of resolving the conflict? That's good. What would it look like if you'd resolve the conflict? That's great. See, I don't love the question, what have you done to resolve the conflict, right? If the client had done anything that worked, they wouldn't need coaching. I really like to move forward. Not to say that you can't ask about the past, but I try to make sure every question I ask moves the conversation forward because I'm being paid a ton of money. I like, what result do you want with your partner? That's good. Okay. So again, I'm not a fan of like asking questions about the current situation that the client already knows or what the client's tried, but you decide. All right. I like questions like, what would be possible if you resolve it? Like the two types of questions I see in the chat that I might tend to ask and that I think are really good coaching questions are things about like, what's possible if you resolve the conflict, as Ann asked, or why do you want to resolve this, or why does this matter? That's good. As well as, if the conflict were resolved, what would it look like? Because now we have outcomes. All right. So now let's say the client says, I'm wondering whether to even continue in partnership with him. Here, the coach could say, I don't blame you. What's the best way to separate? Right. Again, the coach is validating. I don't blame you. I do that too. Again, second bullet, same thing. I'm a lone eagle myself. I understand. You see, the coach makes it about themselves. And then the third one, the coach makes a directive. Have you considered making him a buyout offer? Very mediocre responses from a coaching point of view. What would be better here? Okay, yeah, Rob, what would it look like if you ended the partnership, right? What would be the impact of a breakup? What's possible if you continue? I would just ask the client here, where do you want to go from here then? Would you like to look at the pros and cons of continuing in the partnership? Would you like to go back to the conflict? Again, I'm keeping it at a high level. For me, it's almost, coaching is almost this Zen experience where I just want to be there and see. I'll let the client tell me where they want to go. Okay. Next, the client says, whatever we ask, the client says he just has a different style than I do. He takes forever to make a decision and really isn't very open to my ideas. So here the coach might say, I'm liking him less and less, right? Obviously an inappropriate statement. That's his style, but what about your style contributes to the client conflict, right? I mean, that's okay. We're getting into like both parties, but and have you told him this, right? Very directive, right? Have you told him this? Not a bad question. Maybe we need to know this, but what might be a more powerful question? Yeah, what would you like to do next? How do you know he's not liking your ideas? That's interesting, right? Elizabeth sees maybe an assumption being made here. What are the possibilities in having different styles? Great, very nice, appreciative question there. Right, maybe we ask for an example. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could do here. I don't even know, right? Maybe I just reflect back. So you're saying he has a different style and you're frustrated that he takes forever to make a decision. I might just keep quiet and see what the client says next. Not even sure, but anyway, a lot of great questions there. Tell me more, Nancy says. That's a great one. Exactly. All right, let's see where this conversation goes. Client says, the thing is, he's also brilliant with strategic thinking and he knows the market better than anyone, right? So a bad coach, some of these I've made up, but some of these I actually heard from a recording. No one said still he's kind of a jerk, right? But you could see a coach staying in that judgment mode. Who else can you find to replace him? Very directive. How can you develop these skills so you don't need them anymore? Again, the coach seems to have it in their head, this idea that they, the coach is being directive there. What might be a better alternative here? Another tell me more. Yeah, back to organizing the pros and cons might be really good, right? I could summarize here and say, look, okay, so I've heard you say some things you don't like about him. I've heard you say he's brilliant. He knows the market better than anyone. I would just say, well, help me set the direction here, right? At the beginning, you had a conflict that you wanted to resolve, and now you're saying some good things about this person. You also said you're not sure you want to continue. So what are the implications of these strengths of this person and where you want to go from here? Do you see that high level? Again, my coaching has gotten very much like that now, where I'm just there to help the client guide where they want to go. All right, now this here, the client, I remember this was a very real, interesting situation because it turns out it wasn't just about a conflict with the partner. Right. Yeah. Doris makes a good point. I haven't heard a clear goal. We might have to go back to saying, listen, I'm a little confused here. What really do you want to get out of the session? Because I'm hearing a lot of strands here. That's a really good point, Doris. So now maybe the client raises another issue, right? As was said earlier, sometimes the real issue doesn't come out till later. The client says, we're running out of cash. That's the other problem. We each put in a set amount and agreed this would be our limit, but he's wealthy. I am not. Actually, if I remember right, he just had an inheritance. And so this was new. And now he wants us both to invest more. So what do you say here, right? This coach tries to say, where can you go to get more money? Leads just right to that. And then or says something like, I know an angel investor group, perhaps I could make an introduction. So what might you say here that I think would be less directive, maybe a better question here? Yeah, Pam, let's focus them. What do you really want to talk about here? Is it about the cash? Is it about the partner? We could maybe explore, would you like to explore which is more the priority here? Linda has a good question too. Linda's might, it gets us to what would you accomplish with further investment? Nancy says, how do you want to move forward? Yep, all perfectly fine. Again, we want to let the client go where they want to go. It's hard to tell what the client really wants to discuss with all of this stuff going on. Celia says, would you ask if he's voiced these concerns to his partner? Sure. At some point I might say, it sounds like you have a lot of frustrations. I don't know whether you've had this conversation with your partner or not. And that might lead to role play, right? Maybe we say, is that something you want to do? Maybe eventually we get to a role play. I think you'll see as this unfolds, that happens. All right, let's just do a few more. I think you're getting the idea here. Yeah, Elizabeth says, what's your desired outcome here? Client says, I really have no idea what to do here. You can see some of the responses here that once again have the coach wanting to butt in. What could you ask instead? There's a great coaching question here that I like to use when the client says they have no idea. Yeah, Linda does one version of it. If you had a colleague with this problem, what would you suggest? And Pam gets the other one. Perfect, thanks. She says, if you did know, what would you do? Which sounds like a ridiculous question. And it turns out it's a brilliant kind of question. It's almost like a question a hypnotist would ask, where we get out of the left brain and move into this right brain. It's really interesting. It's a great question. Okay, so then the client says, so what are your ideas? What do you suggest? To you, the coach. And again, this coach says, it's about time you asked. I have a lot of great ideas. What have we learned here so far? What would you do instead? What could you do? This gets right to your willingness to give advice or not. Pam says deflect. Yeah, so how would you deflect? Yeah, there we go. Nancy, I have several ideas that might work for me, but what are your ideas? Yep, it's not about what I would do. What do you want? Very good. And to say, can I ask you a few more questions? I'm not sure yet. That's a great one. All good. Briefly, Al, if you go to our website, you'll see all the scheduled sessions. We have one in May, we have one in July for our seminar. All right. Well, listen, it sounds like we're at the end of the hour. This was for 90 minutes and a lot of folks have to hop, which is good with me. Let me take some questions then, okay? We could keep doing this. I think you all get the sense of what you want to do. So ask any questions you have about the program at this point. I'll tell you a little bit more about our program if that's okay. And, my main goal here is you just reach out to me if you'd like a strategy session to see if this is right for you and you're ready to go. All I ask though is that you've reviewed our website, right? centerforexecutivecoaching.com. You know the pricing and your timing is within a month or two, right? Usually when people say they're going to, they want to do something in a year, they're never going to do it, right? It's just sort of someday. And a strategy session, I don't know, that's just a fancy word for let's just talk about whether there's a fit, right? You've been through the member area. You think you might want to join and you just have some questions or you want to see if it's a mutual fit. That's all, nothing more than that. I just want to, in some closing moments here, just talk about, the difference between our program and the others, right? You can join a ton of ICF, ACTP programs, soon to be called level 2 programs. They all offer sort of, the basics. That's not enough in our opinion. The market really requires a lot. And so we're trying to attract the people who are going to be in the top 5% of coaches worldwide. That is, you have aspirations to grow a serious practice and be the best. And that means you know that it's about results and value, right? There's too many coaching programs where it's about the coach going through some transformational program for themselves that doesn't apply to clients. We're about serving clients and getting results for them. And we want you to feel confident and passionate and excited about what you do. Those are the people who come to us, okay? So let me share with you just a few things here, and then I'll answer some of the questions I see coming through the chat, if that's okay. One, everything we do is about real life coaching cases and data, all right? It's practical, it's not theoretical. Two, you're gonna get, well, it's actually 30 powerful coaching solutions and methodologies, right? So we have been doing this for 20 years with clients in 32 countries, with coaches in 32 countries. So we keep updating our methodologies. So you're going to get the best methodologies out there for working with clients on top issues. And we've covered quite a few of these already, right? Resolving conflict, engaging the team, change, succession, high performance culture, career shifts, etc. You're going to get the best marketing support in the industry, guaranteed, okay? Because I know I can guarantee it because we can get on the phone anytime, as well as the fact that in your member area, there's hours and hours of tools and videos, pricing, proposals, everything to make sure you know how to attract clients. If you're internal, we also have internal documents and contracts. The people who join us are from amazing organizations. They have amazing backgrounds. Makes it very easy to teach this program because our participants get together and help each other, right? One of the things, like people will say, is this really the time to start a practice? I promise you, a program like this just opens new doors. You're going to learn stuff that you can use throughout your career, right? But we're not teaching you just to be a one and done coach, right? We want you to be a trusted advisor. We're going to show you how to get lots of openings, coaching, assessments, facilitation, training, and even create passive income if you want. So many of our members have written books. They have created training programs. They're speakers. It's really cool. It's whatever you want to do. And you get lifetime support. We're not supposed to say this. Our terms say something like 2 or 3 years, whatever the lawyers made me say, but it's like your life or mine, and I have a successor. All right. And again, you can see everything you receive on the website. I'm not going to bore you with this. All right. It's asked here, are there scholarships? We don't offer scholarships, but you can stretch out payments. We have like a 10-month payment plan that you'll see when you register. And you get to choose, right? You could start with just distance learning, no ICF. You can add the ICF for a little bit more. There's a seminar. Again, that's what I'm doing this for now. We have a May 23rd to 25th seminar. That's 3 days. It accelerates your hours towards the ICF. Okay. So you see the next steps here. Let me answer some questions. Please reach out. So let's see. One is, I'm in another country. So we have, you can go on our website and see a schedule of when we have our live classes. We have them all hours of the day, right? We even have a faculty member from Eastern Europe who teaches. We have a 7 to 8 p.m. class, New York time. So it shouldn't be a problem. All right, let's see. Here's a good question. I'm always interested in anything about military. Are there any areas that seem to be a trend? Yes. First of all, the military is investing, the US military is investing heavily in coaching. We get a lot of people who are current military that we're training as coaches. So it's a big thing within the military. They want to change the culture and create more of a coaching culture there. Also, when when leaders from military get out of the military, there's a ton of coaching opportunities to help them start businesses, transition, be more effective in organizations that don't have a military style culture. And it's at all levels of leadership, okay? The different levels of the ICF. So we have another video that you can see under our articles about the levels of the ICF, but basically there's 3. The ACC, which is where most people start, the PCC, and the MCC. The MCC is for overachievers. That's if you want to be a mentor coach. I wouldn't worry about that. The ACC, you need our training plus 100 hours of coaching experience starting when you join a program. And we'll match you up with coaches in our program so you can barter together. And that's allowed within the ICF. So that's pretty cool. The PCC, you need an additional 400 hours of coaching. Okay. And again, there's a video. The ICF is complicated. They've just changed everything again. I don't think it's going to help them be less complicated. So we're here to make sure you're okay with that. Okay. And that, we haven't lost one yet. We'll show you the easiest way to apply to them and get approved. We also offer something called the board certified coach, to Pam's question. I love that. That's with another third party organization like the ICF. I love the name board certified coach. That's awesome. And if it's for people who have a master's degree or higher, right? That could include an MD, an MBA, a JD, any other kind of master's in a social science, right? Not so much engineering. And you only need 60 hours with that. Okay, and you could check with that organization and see if your master's degree works. I think a master's of accounting should, as long as you relate it to leadership and business, but you'd have to check with them. You only need 60 hours of training with that, and you don't need mentor coaching. It's included with all of our programs. And then you apply to them, we endorse your application, and you take their test. Okay, Gregory asked, what makes the ICF premier in the industry? I can't answer that. I can just say marketing. I really think, the ICF has done a great job marketing themselves as the gold standard. Okay, I've seen tons of coaches from there. They've issued 50,000 designations, but to be honest, I would not hire most of the coaches that have ICF designations. That's not what sets you apart in the market. It's good. It's a great thing to have. I'm grateful to the ICF, but I just believe that it's a foundational standard. It's not enough, especially for executive coaches. That's where we come in. Okay. All right, let me take this off record. Those of you listening to the recording, please reach out anytime. You can see how to do that right here on the screen. Those of you who have been on this webinar, I thank you for your time. Please reach out. I'm going to stop recording here.